So let me, without any delay, invite our community members who have come from different locations, very, very far locations. And so let's invite first Miss Sibani Bijli. Please come on the stage. Thank you. She's from Odisha. Mr. Satyasilan M. Mr. Aigede Pavana. And we'll have a video from Bangladesh. So, can I request starting the session, please? All right, so we are all gathered here on the western coast of India. Let me take you first to our speaker who's coming all the way from eastern coast, and it's almost about 2,000 kilometers from here, Miss Sibani Bijli. She is the Sarpanch. Okay. She's the Sarpanch, which is basically a village, a head of group of villages in Odisha. And she has experienced in her childhood also a very devastating cyclone, super cyclone in 1999. And still she is a very loving mother of a 3-year-old, a wife, and a powerful head of the village where she has ensured that there is preparedness for disasters. So Shibani ji, आप अपना experience हमसे share करिए जो भी है अपने भाषा में. While she speaks in Odia language, we will also have a summary running on the PowerPoint, which you'll be able to see simultaneously.
ସମସ୍ତଙ୍କୁ ମୋର ନମସ୍କାର. ମୋର ଅନୁଭୂତିକୁ ଆଜି ଆପଣଙ୍କ ମାନଙ୍କ ସାଙ୍ଗରେ ବାଣ୍ଟି ଥିବାରୁ G20 ଏତେ ବଡ଼ ମଞ୍ଚରେ ଆପଣଙ୍କ ସାଙ୍ଗରେ ସେୟାର କରିଥିବାରୁ ମୁଁ ନିଜକୁ ବହୁତ ଗର୍ବ ଅନୁଭବ କରୁଅଛି. ଆମର ଓଡ଼ିଶାରେ 99 ମହାବାତ୍ୟା ଯେତେବେଳେ କୌଣସି ଓଡ଼ିଶାରେ କୌଣସି ପ୍ରକାର ବାତ୍ୟା ସମ୍ବନ୍ଧରେ କୌଣସି ଆଲର୍ଟ ନଥିଲା, ଆଲର୍ଟ କରିବା ଓଡ଼ିଶାରେ କୌଣସି ଆଲର୍ଟ ସୁବିଧା ନଥିଲା. ଯେତେବେଳେ ମୋର ଜଗତସିଂହପୁର ଜିଲ୍ଲା ଏରସମା ବ୍ଲକ ଯେତେବେଳେ ଓଡ଼ିଶାରେ ଯେତେବେଳେ 99 ମହାବାତ୍ୟା ଆସିଥିଲା ସେତେବେଳେ କେହି ଜାଣିନଥିଲେ ତାଙ୍କର କରାଳ ରୂପ ପ୍ରାକୃତିକ ଏତେ କରାଳ ରୂପ ଭୟଙ୍କର ରୂପ ଦେଖେଇବ ବୋଲିକିନା. ଯେତେବେଳେ ଆରମ୍ଭ ହୋଇଥିଲା ତାଙ୍କ କରାଳ ରୂପ ମାନେ କେହି କିଛି ଭାବିବା ଆଗରୁ ସବୁ କିଛି ଧୋଇ ନେଇଯାଇଥିଲେ. ଯେମିତିକି ଆମର ଧନ ସମ୍ପତ୍ତି ଘର ଦ୍ୱାର ସବୁକିଛି ଧୋଇ ନେଇ ଯାଇଥିଲେ. କିଛି ପରିବାର ମାନେ 5 ରୁ 10 ଯେଉଁ 5 ଜଣ ପରିବାରରୁ 3 ଜଣ ମାନେ ଭାସି ଯାଇଛନ୍ତି, 10 ଜଣରୁ 8 ଜଣ ପରିବାର ଭାସି ଯାଇଛନ୍ତି, କେହି କାହାର ସମ୍ପୂର୍ଣ୍ଣ ପରିବାର ହିଁ ଭାସି ଯାଇଛି. ମୋର ବି ମଧ୍ୟ ଦୁଇ ଭାଇ ମଧ୍ୟ ମୃତ୍ୟୁବରଣ କରିଛନ୍ତି ସେଇ ମହାବାତ୍ୟାରେ. ମାନେ ଆମେ ବି ଏବେ ଆମ ପରିବାର ଭାବୁଛୁ ଆମର ଦୁଇ ଭାଇ ଯେଉଁଠି ଅଛନ୍ତି ଭଲରେ ଥାଆନ୍ତୁ. ଏତେ ଆମେ ସବୁବେଳେ ଆମେ ଠାକୁରଙ୍କ ପାଖରେ ପ୍ରାର୍ଥନା କରୁ, ଜୟ ଜଗନ୍ନାଥ ଠାକୁର ପାଖରେ ପ୍ରାର୍ଥନା କରୁ. କିନ୍ତୁ ଯେତେବେଳେ ମହାବାତ୍ୟା ଯେତେବେଳେ ମୁଁ କହି ଉଠୁଛି କହିବାର ଯେତେବେଳେ କହୁଛି ମୋ ମନ ଭିତରେ ମୋ ହାର୍ଟବିଟ୍ ବଢ଼ି ଯାଉଛି ବା ଦେହ ରୁମ ଟୁଙ୍କୁରି ଯାଉଛି ବହୁତ. ଯେତେବେଳେ ମୁଁ मु बत्तीघर जो केन्द्रापड़ा जिला बत्तीघर पंचायत को गोटे सरपंच तो बाहर आसली सरपंच हेली सरपंच होगापर मोर गाँव तीनोटी साइक्लोन मु तार रक्षण भक्षण प्रेसिडेंट अच्छी जितेबाला आमर प्रेसिडेंट रे आमर 75 जन टीम अच्छी आमर गोटे रेस्क्यू टीम फास्ट एड 50 जन को आम ट्रेनिंग दे सारीचु आ जो 25 जन अच्छा मेंबर जो अच्छा से आमर परिचालना कमिटी तरफ ट्रेनिंग दि जाइए जितेबाला मु तो फास्ट मु बहुत बात्या देखी आमर फनी हो फाइलैंड हो गुलाब जाबात बहुत इत्यादि बात्या देखी किंतु गत 20 वर्ष मध्य बहुत माने 20 वर्ष मध्य एते परिवर्तन होई अछि जे बहुत परिवर्तन होई अछि से मानक जो तांकर जोगाजोग सुदृढ़ थिबा आमर ओडिशा सरकार से मान आमर ओडिशा सरकार सम्मान्य नवीन पट्टनायक रे आसीबा तांकर बहुत बहुत आगु को बढ़ी आमर ओडिशा आमर ओएसडमा तरफ तांकर जेतेक साहाय्य सहयोग से माने ताकू बहुत बहुत धन्य देवी तांकर ना आमर ओडिशा सरकार एवं ओएसडमा तरफ तांकर जेते प्रशंसा कले कम हो जिवो बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद जेतेबेले आमे बात्या विषय जो आमको 10 दिन आगुरी आमको SMS पड़े आसती जो आम भुवनेश्वर साइरेन बाजिले गाँव रे जो आम 3टी साइक्लोन अच्छी से 3टी साइक्लोन रे बाजे साइरेन बाजे जे हाँ आम टीवी न्यूज ट्रांसपोर्ट पाणीपाग सूचना रेडियो माध्यम रे बहुत विभिन्न प्रकार आम सूचना 15 दिन आगुरी पाई जाऊँ जितेबाला आम 15 दिन आगुरी जो पाई जाऊँ मुझे सरपंच अच्छी आमर 25 जनिया जनक जो टीम अच्छी से टीम को आम डकाऊ डकैला आम से कहतु जे आमर सुरक्षित जगह कौ जगह अच्छी आम जिते गर्भवती माँ मैंने केमती मेडिकल को रेफर करूँ तापर आमर जो बुढ़ा बुढ़ी लोक अच्छे असुरक्षित जगह को सुरक्षित आणिक रखा बेस्ट आमर पानीय खाद्य आउ मेडिसिन आम एमती सब प्रकार व्यवस्था करूँ एवं सरकार तरफ आमर जेते अग्निशम भाई ओड्राफ टीम तांकर जंत्रपाति आणती जो आमर बालुका जो अच्छा बालुका बंध आमर बंध कहती से घाई हो गले बालुका पकेट बस्ता से मैंने आणिकी पकई दियंती विशेषकर मैंने बहुत 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 आगे जाइए आमर बहुत आगे जाइए किंतु जो माने 1990 जो महाबात्या खाई एबे भी तांको मनरु से कथा लिभिनी से माने एबे ही भाबुचंती जेतले बात्या आसे तांको मन भीतर गोटे भय सृष्टि हुई जाए से आजिकल ये जो टेक्निकल जुग जो चलती मैंने आम 15 दिन आगुरी जापरचु कौटी आरंभ होची बंगोपसागर जदि आरंभ है कौ आड़ को मुव कर केमती कौन आसब केते जोरे पवन आसब सेटा आम जानीपारू तो मुझे मोर इच्छा मुझे कही रखुची जमती आमर विपर्य अंचल जमती आमर 1990 महाबात्या जो आरंभ होता महाबात्या होता मोर भी 2 भाई भासी सेमती कहा जीवन में न हो आपण मानक सबू गेस्ट मान को रिक्वेस्ट करछि आपण माने सचेतनता हेबे आ लोक मान को केमती सचेतनता पहुँचेबे जीवन गोटे जीवन हूँ मूल्यवान से जीवन मूल्यवान केमिति न हानि हम केमती आम ताको जीवन सुरक्षा देबा सेदी आपन को कहि मोर रिक्वेस्ट आपन करूची समस्त पाखरे से न्यूज़टा पहुँचाया पाई एति कहि मोर वक्तव्य रखुची जय जगन्नाथ मु विशेषकर आमर ओडिशा सरकार नवीन पट्टनायक जी को बहुत बहुत ओएसडमा तरफ बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद किंतु जो आने का बाद बहुत डिजास्टरमेंट बहुत बदल गया इसलिए उनको धन्यवादों का जय जगन्नाथ नमस्कार
बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद बहुत अच्छे से शेयर किया थैंक यू वेरी मच and you seen she's gone through herself she's lost her brothers earlier and she's seen so many cyclones and the changes that have been made. She's thanked Orissa government and OSDMA for the work, and this year also OSDMA has the state has won the Subhash Chandra Bose Award for disaster management, so a lot of things done, and she's coming from there. From the points that she said, it's very important to realize that on one hand, while government at national level, at state level is doing a lot of things on enhancing technology and sending timely alerts, but equally important, or rather more important, is the part which community plays or the local governance plays in terms of disseminating the warning for early action. And that's something which she's been leading, and it's important for all the people at global or national level to keep that as a focus when the planning for early warning or early action is being done. With this, thank you so much again. We will move to our neighboring country again, Bangladesh, a country from which we have, which has suffered a lot. If you again go back to 1970, the Bhola cyclone which hit Bangladesh, it was 300,000 deaths that were experienced. And then again in 1991 there was, but in recent Amphan cyclone, the deaths were I think 30 or 31. So that's the level of preparedness and early warning that has been done by them. So we will get to see a video from Bangladesh and just understand what all has been done. So please.
বৃহস্পতিবার তো ওই সকালের দিক দিয়ে অল্প অল্প বৃষ্টি হচ্ছে, আসরের দিক দিয়ে বৃষ্টির সংখ্যা বাড়ে গেছে এবং আমরা কোনো দিকে কোনো সংকেত পাই নাই, না পাওয়া নেই। আমরা ওই ঘরেই রয়েছি। বন্যা শুরু হয়ে গেছে মাগরিব পরপর সময়ে।
আমার কোলে আমার মাইয়ে ছিল, আমার মাইয়ে গলায় ধরা, আর আমার দুই হাতে দুইটা ভাই, আর আমার মা বড় হেও ওই আমার একটা ভাইয়ের হাত ধরছে পর পানির যে এমন স্রোত দেশে ছিড্ডে বিড্ডে মানে আজ ছাড়া কোথায় হয়ে গেছে জানি না।
আমার ওয়াইফের মানে আমার কাপড় ধরা ছিল ওই সাইডে, আর ওই ছেলে কোলে ছিল। তা আমি ওই বড় ছেলেটা সাঁতার জানতো, 8 বছর বয়স ছিল। সাঁতার জানার পর আমি মনে করছি ও তো ভালো সাঁতার জানে, ওরে আমার কাছে, ওরে তুমি নাও। সে ছিল প্রেগনেন্ট অবস্থায়, গর্ভবতী অবস্থায়, আর ছোটো ছেলে আমার কাছে নাও। এর ভিতরে হাস্য ঠিক আছে। 8 দিনের দিন আমার বড় ছেলেটা আমি পাইলাম, আর ওই সোজার নিচে একটু গভীরে আমার ওয়াইফ ওই কচুরির ভিতরে, আর ছোট ছেলে 4 বছর বয়স, তারে পাই নাই টোটাল।
এর কান্দা এখনো কান্দে, এই সিডের কান্দা এখনো কান্দতে চায়, মানে যে কয়জন শখের যে কয়জন আদরের হয়ে গেছে।
In total, some 3,400 people lost their lives in Cyclone Cedar. Even higher fatalities occurred as a consequence of earlier cyclones, reaching 1 million people in Cyclone Bhola in 1970. Lower losses in Cyclone Cedar reflected huge advances in early warning systems. Bangladesh continues to strengthen both its early warnings capabilities and capacities on the ground to take effective action in response to warnings, providing a role model to other countries.
তখন আমরা খাবার দাবার এগুলো গুছাবো, কাগজপত্র পলিথিনে ভরিয়া গর্তের ভিতরে নেবো, এবার গরু গোসের ওই দিকটা উঠাই দেবো, খুঁটে উঠাই দেবো, গরু ছাড়িয়ে দেবো, বাচ্চা নিয়ে যাবো। তো ওই সব গুছাই গেছে, নিয়ে যাবো এই আশ্রয় কেন্দ্রে যাবো।
কিছুদিন আগে আমাদের একটা ঘূর্ণিঝড় হয়েছে বুলবুল, আমরা সময় মতোই সব কিছু করছি, সময় মতোই আমরা সেন্টারে গেছি, যার কারণে আমাদের কোনো ক্ষতিগ্রস্ত হয় নাই। ব্র্যাক আমাদের এত সুন্দর একটা প্রশিক্ষণ দিছে যা আমাদের জীবন এখন বাঁচায়।
So we saw in this video again an example of how preparedness, early warning for cyclone has changed the whole scenario in the country, and it has also inspired preparedness a lot in India as well. Again, a lot of focus on capacity building of communities, a lot of focus on infrastructure and information dissemination so that people can be evacuated and they can take shelter and they can be saved from cyclones. So these two examples from communities that we've seen so far are from cyclones. We'll now move again to India, another part of India, where our next speaker has experienced not just cyclone but other disasters, and his memories from other disasters are there. The early warning system that existed at that time was there. He was 13-year-old when the Indian Ocean tsunami had struck India, and he was himself also affected. And from then to now, how multi-hazard early warning system has emerged is something we will hear from him. So I would invite Satyaseelan, who is the community representative from Nagapattinam, Tamil Nadu, to share his experiences, please. Thank you.
அனைவருக்கும் வணக்கம். First of all, I would like to thank all of you for this opportunity to share my experience of Cyclone Gaja. So even I speak in English, if anywhere I am stuck, I will also speak in Tamil. Sorry to that. So in 2018 November, the Gaja cyclone was hit with the wind speed of 120 km per hour in the coastal region of Nagapattinam district in the state of Tamil Nadu. So I want to let me tell about that cyclone warning, how it has helped the people to survive from that cyclone Gaja. So I remember that initially before 10 days of the cyclone hitting the state, the government have reached all the peoples through multiple channels like mass medias, or social network like WhatsApp, or public announcement, and also they have directly reached the people with the support of local governments, as well as the community-based organization like youth clubs, children clubs, and SHG groups. So here the better thing I would like to say is that the system created within the community have easily reached the people, especially who are living in the vulnerable areas also, because those people from the community was well, okay, sorry, those people from the community was well aware about that situation of their own villages, because they could easily find out that where the disabled persons are living, or where the children are living, or where the most vulnerable peoples are living, like that. So they supported the government to evacuate during the time of disaster. That is one of the best practice as I feel as a community person. And also when it comes to tsunami experience, no? So this Gaja is far better. It is due to that increased early warning system, as well as that capacitated community-based organization. Because when I was studying 8th standard, as he said, I was in 13 years old. At that time, tsunami was hit in the coastal region of whole Tamil Nadu. I am part of Nagapattinam district. So within the district itself, we have found that around 6,400 people were lost their lives during the tsunami. That is due to because of there was no communication to the communities at the time. So everywhere standing in the coastal area and playing in the coastal area, especially children have lost their lives. So overall 6,400 out of 8,000 children in the 8,000 people in the Tamil Nadu have lost their lives in the Nagapattinam district itself. So now coming to Gaja, now a lot of early warning system created, especially through child clubs, through youth clubs, and through disaster management committee and task force. So with the support of them, the problems are fairly reduced this time. So it was recorded only 8 children were died during that Gaja cyclone. So we felt that the success of this work comes as the coordination of local community and the capacity of the local community peoples, as well as the government departments' initial early warning systems. So each disaster will provide the learning for everyone. For us as we the community, we felt that this time the preparedness and the early warning would be the crucial role for reducing the losses of cyclone or any disasters. So what would be the way forward is, I would like to suggest that so every regions or every countries should have the community-based organization like child-centric clubs and youth clubs or task force teams would support the place to recover easily from the disaster times. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Satya. Again, an emphasis on capacity building of communities, how important it is. Capacity building also of local civil society organizations, coordination between these organizations. That's the core element if you want effective reduction in fatalities due to disasters. If you want early warning to be effective, you really have to focus on capacity building at the lowest level. You have to focus on the coordination at lowest level. So thank you so much, Satya, for this. I will now move to our next speaker, who's coming from Indonesia. He represents, Mr. I. Gede Pawana. He is the chief of a village and also village Duda Timur, and also chairman of Pasebaya Agung. Now, Pasebaya Agung is a locally led volcano eruption awareness forum, which he's been leading. And this forum has won a lot of appreciation, and they've been covered in media. They have won awards for that. So it's a great, let us hear from him how they have mobilized community to come together to spread awareness about volcano. It's a very different disaster, but definitely a learning for us. Over to you, sir.
Swastiastu. Thank you so much. Nama saya Gede Pawana. I'm the chief of the Duda Timur village, and dan banyak kegiatan mungkin yang saya lakukan. Jadi Gunung Agung ada di wilayah Bali, kemudian lokasi pada saat kejadian itu di September 2017, dan salah satu desa saya ada di wilayah radius 10 km dari kawah Gunung Agung. Kemudian kegiatan-kegiatan yang kita lakukan dari awal yaitu berusaha untuk melakukan edukasi, memberikan pengetahuan kepada warga masyarakat di lingkar Gunung Agung dengan mulai melakukan kerjasama dengan orari, community, kemudian membangun dimotivasi oleh BNPB, kemudian membentuk sebuah komunitas-komunitas baru yang nantinya adalah tujuannya bagaimana membantu masyarakat di lingkar Gunung Agung yang melakukan pengungsian-pengungsian. Jadi gambar-gambar ini menunjukkan bahwa kegiatan-kegiatan yang kita lakukan dalam memberikan edukasi tentang erupsi Gunung Agung. Lanjut. Dan ini salah satu akhirnya terbentuk Pasebaya Agung di 2017 dengan 28 desa di wilayah Gunung Agung. Kemudian kita beri nama Pasebaya Agung dan lokasinya ada di Desa Duda Timur. Ya. Kemudian Pasebaya Agung banyak melakukan kegiatan-kegiatan, yaitu melakukan memberikan informasi untuk mengurangi hoax, kemudian melakukan membentuk komunitas, kemudian bagaimana kelanjutan dalam proses-proses kegiatan-kegiatan di Pasebaya Agung ini bisa berjalan dengan baik. Dan ini salah satu kegiatan kita, dan kita juga memiliki hampir 1.228 relawan yang kita ajak untuk melakukan kegiatan pemantauan, kemudian juga membantu jika ada kerusakan-kerusakan terutama rumah warga. Jadi kami selalu ada di lapangan, bahkan meninggalkan anak dan istri untuk sebuah perjuangan relawan. Persebaya Agung jadi aktif juga mengajak anak-anak muda yang kita libatkan ke semuanya untuk kita ajak bersama dan untuk melakukan pelatihan-pelatihan dalam kegiatan-kegiatan kebencanaan, dan banyak yang akhirnya ikut dan bisa bergabung dengan Persebaya Agung. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir. It was really a different experience where, unlike cyclones, unlike floods, where the event happens once, the volcano eruption, it goes on, and the warnings are also continued. So how the community was mobilized, he also talked about some of the challenges faced, where keeping the volunteers motivated is another challenge, because it's a volunteers group. After some time they lose motivation. The other challenge he also talked about before this, we were talking, where he mentioned that sometimes the hikers, just out of excitement, they're not aware of how much risk it could be in a volcano. They'll start climbing the mountains. So how to stop them from getting at risk, exposed to the risk. So that's again something which is another challenge that he talked about. But if we look at overall, I think the focus was the role of people, community, volunteers. They are at the center. And if we look at all the four presentations and sharing that have happened from Bangladesh, from Odisha, from Tamil Nadu, from Indonesia, everyone is focusing on the areas of community level awareness, information dissemination, capacity building. So when we are talking of the four fundamentals of the early warning system, the risk, knowledge, and monitoring, I think we are adequately investing on the first two elements, but the lower two elements perhaps require more focus, more investment, and so that the capacities of the communities are built, and so that there's enhanced dissemination of information that is received for early warning and early action. With this, I would like to close this session with again thanking you all, the speakers, for our next session for our next segment on national priorities and opportunities for strengthening early warning systems. I would invite Sri Kamal Kishore again to take over the floor. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Elias. So we saw how the organization at the level of community is really key. If we do not organize ourselves at the level of community, then all of the other subsystems of early warning systems do not really lead to reduction in loss of lives and reduction in other losses. Ilya talked about the fact that, keeping people motivated, the role of volunteers is very key. I think another issue that I want to highlight, and that was so evident from the images we saw, is women's leadership. The example that we have from Nagapattinam, the example we have from Odisha, if you do not involve, forget about involving, if women do not lead the community level organization, there will always be deficiencies in how organized a community is to respond to early warning systems. So that's really, really key. With that, now let's go one level up and talk about how some of the national level actors respond to the needs and demands of the people we just heard. These are our clients. So to do that discussion, I would like to invite 4 country experiences and 1 regional experience. I would like to invite Dr. Aditya Jati. Maybe you can join me here. Dr. Aditya, please. And then Madam Shoko Kabuto from Japan. Dr. Mahapatra, Director General of India Met. Ms. Pumeza Theali from the National Disaster Management Center in South Africa. And Mr. Subaya from the Regional Integrated Multi-Hazard Early Warning Systems. So we have 4 countries and 1 regional organization represented here. We will not have any presentations. I have some questions. Raditya, if I may start with you. We have heard colleague from Mount Agung, and that was a case of a volcano. But I know that in Indonesia, not just in terms of short-term weather and climate forecast, but also for seasonal forecast. And Mr. Subaya is here, and in my previous life, I used to work with him in Indonesia. Indonesia has done a lot of work in application of seasonal forecast and early warning as well for different sectors, water resources, agriculture, etc. So remarkable progress in reducing loss of lives and loss of livelihoods as well. So what are some of the next frontiers? What are some of your remaining challenges in the area of early warning that you're trying to address?
Thank you, Kamal. So first of all, I'd like to thank you for this session. I mean, with people center as an early warning system, as an approach, I think is very important that Indonesia is a big country, as an archipelagic state, where many hazards there. So like Mr. Igede Pawana mentioned about the volcanic eruption, and it's very important that we have now 127 volcanoes active, and they are now under the Ministry of Energy and Mineral to monitor the deformation, the activity, and so on, coordinating with the National Disaster Management Authority when the people have to evacuate. And this is one of the examples that the community surrounding the volcano is very active. We have also people from the Java Island with many volcanoes there. And this is the one how we really make the resiliency as a very local issue. That's why people center is very important. The second, you're mentioning about how we can really be aware with the coastal area. For example, now we are in the high prone area for the mega trust, and probably there will be a tsunami there, like the wake-up call in 2004. We have the Palu 2018 also related that there's an earthquake and tsunami and so on. So now with the program with the BNPB and also the Meteorological and Climatological Geophysics Agency, together we have a program to make a buoy early warning system for tsunami related, almost all the related area for the mega trust. We try to put that, and not only about the early warning that we want to highlight here, is about how well people know the early warning system is to do. It's like you mentioned today, early warning to early action, but investment is very important. That's why we are now also not only putting the technology and science there, but how to put the people awareness, collective awareness and consciousness that they're living in the hazard-prone area to be aware. Even we have a local traditional knowledge on how to be aware on that. Many stories have been there also. You remember if the story from the tsunami Aceh, Vongspong people, that if the ocean related to be, will make a tsunami because there's a song related to this tsunami. So they learn from generation to generation to do that. The other issues and about application that you mentioned about, we have a platform, what we call Inaris, and this is also API to other line ministry that related to early warning system from upstream to downstream area. So NDMA is, like I mentioned today, like we're in the midstream area that we are also how we can really reduce the impact of the downstream area, because the primary driving force is the climate change as the driving force. For example, now we're now aware of the drought season. This is potentially for drought and forest fire. So coordinating meeting with the Ministry of Environment, and also the President also mentioned that this is a must that we have to be ready. Monitoring system, satellite and everything we are putting all together. But the most important thing again is not only about the technology and science and the application, but the people who is really surrounding the hazard-prone area. And the other thing is about, you mentioned about agriculture. Impact of the flood related to the impact of the paddy field that might also cannot be harvested. So just a few months ago, we separated for all over Indonesia to see what is the impact of the flood and related to agriculture, livelihood of the farmers itself. So the insurance now from the Ministry of Agriculture, they put 20% for the farmer and 80% is provided by the government to have insurance of the agriculture. So not only talking about early warning system, but we're talking from upstream to downstream and how we can really make the people resilient, especially the people who's in the hazard-prone area with a multi-hazard warning system that we have to face it now. Thank you, Kamal. Maybe that answer your question.
Thank you, Raditya. So you said a lot there. There is, of course, need for investing in better observational network, better forecasting, better warning. But ultimately, it is about how do you communicate it to people? How do you combine that scientific insight with the indigenous knowledge and really come together to make an impact at the community level? Let's now turn to Japan. You know, in Japan, there is your observational network is amongst the densest. You have a citizenry which is perhaps the most aware anywhere in the world. To me, it seems that you don't have any challenges left in this area. So I would like to hear what are you trying to do in Japan, how you want to further improve the systems in Japan.
Thank you very much. So my name is Shoko Kabuto. I'm honored to make this presentation on behalf of the Japanese government. So as you know, Japan's weather is very changeable and the country faces various climate hazards. We started developing various early warning systems, including weather radar installed at the top of the mountain in 1960s, and the first weather observation satellite launched in 1970s. We also developed an extensive network of river mountain system with more than 12,000 water level gauges and 6,000 cameras, all accessible from a single website. Now, you might wonder that there would be no problem in Japan in terms of early warning. The answer is no. I would like to emphasize here that early warning, early action is not happening in outer space, on mountain tops, nor in rivers, but is happening on the ground, as indicated in the first session and Dr. Jate's speech. I would like to show you two examples. A town in Okayama was inundated with a flood in July 2018, which resulted in 51 casualties. The disaster happened even though an evacuation advisory was issued on the previous night. Moreover, the flooded area was almost the same to where it was warned as potentially hazard area by a flood projection map that was circulated before the disaster. Why did people not evacuate? The problem was normalcy bias. People have the psychological tendency to underestimate warnings. Another example is about a town in Shizuoka, which was hit by a mudslide in July 2021. In this disaster, 28 people died, and mayor was criticized for not having issued an evacuation order before the disaster strikes. Why did the mayor not issue an evacuation order? The problem was his psychological burden and the lack of expert advice. At the time, rain had been falling for more than 2 days, but the meteorological agency predicted that the peak of rainfall had already passed. In addition, evacuation in the middle of COVID pandemic would cause serious burden to local residents. The mayor faced a difficult decision. So what can we learn from the two examples? I would like to highlight the importance of empowering communities and building capacity of local officials. Let me show you some policy measures in Japan. In order to empower communities for early evacuation, local government were mandated in 2021 to develop a list of residents who are in need of evacuation support at the time of disaster, such as the elderly and the handicapped. They also mandated to facilitate matching those in need of support with those who could offer support at the community. In this way, we ensure that no one will be left behind at the time of disaster. In order to build the capacity of local officials, the national government provides training program to mayors and local officials, as the mayors and the officials rotate quite frequently. The programs will give precious opportunities for unexperienced officials. We studied them in 2013, and nearly 8,000 local officials have finished this program. So let me conclude my presentation by summarizing the key points. Firstly, early warning, early action is happening on the ground. Developing an early warning system by itself cannot save lives. Secondly, empowering communities and building the capacity of local officials are the two key elements for translating early warning system into early action. These challenges are common across national borders, and Japan is ready to contribute by sharing our experiences so that all the citizens, including the most vulnerable, will be covered and protected by early warning systems around the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was fascinating. And you gave us a quotable quote. Early action does not happen in outer space or mountaintops. It happens in communities. And the importance of investing in communities, empowering them, training local officials cannot be overemphasized. And it is quite sobering to hear that you have some of the similar challenges that other countries have. So it's a continuous process. It's not just a one-time thing. So thank you very much for that. With that, now get back to India. Dr. Mahapatra, your clients here in the previous session seemed quite happy with you that now the cyclone forecast is better. You know about an impending cyclone 8 to 10 days in advance, and as you get closer to the event, you give more precise forecasts. The India Met Department is also a designated WMO, Regional Specialized Meteorological Center. You're doing forecasts for the Bay of Bengal, Arabian Sea, serving a number of countries, working with their Met agencies. So what are some of India's challenges? What are some of the remaining frontiers that we have to conquer?
Thank you very much, Kamal Saab. I also thank our clients from different parts of the country for appreciating the early warning service improvement, which has resulted in minimizing loss of lives and properties. Also, it has helped the countries in Bay of Bengal and Arabian Sea by providing guidance to minimize the losses. One success story we heard from Bangladesh. So there is no cyclone last 10 years where death has been more than 100, either in India or in any country in the Bay of Bengal Arabian Sea region. So while we have been able to minimize as a country, it has been possible because of the integrated approach based on early warning. There is an early action at the grassroots level, supported by the national policy guidelines, plannings, and interventions by the disaster managers. The one most important point what has come up when you look at the historical success story, the public-private partnership and the community-based disaster preparedness program in the country, which has helped like cyclones or the heat wave, which has been very successful to minimize the losses. But still, if you just look at with the improvement in socioeconomic conditions in the country, all are at stake due to this type of disasters, and therefore we have the target to minimize the loss of properties. The loss of property, like any part of the world, also is increasing in India. So that is the first focus. We should have the impact-based forecast and risk-based warning for all types of severe weather in the country. so that we not only minimize the loss of lives, but also we minimize the loss of property and save the economy of the country. The next thing is that India being a big country, here, apart from the large-scale disasters like cyclones, floods, droughts, heat waves, or cold waves, we also experience lightning, thunderstorms, squalls, hailstorms, and specifically in this ongoing season, March to June. And it is worth mentioning that about 2,500 people die every year due to lightning. So the second most important focus will be to have early warning and early action for the mesoscale weather events like thunderstorms, lightning, so that we can also demonstrate successfully the minimization of loss of lives and properties to these type of events. The third focus is that we have to enhance our early warning dissemination, especially considering the country surrounded by the Himalayas and the Bay of Bengal, Arabian Sea, and Indian Ocean. And there are many remote areas in the country because of hill and deserts, etc. So the national initiative, which has been taken off like Common Alert Protocol, and global initiative, which is taken off Global Multi-Hazard Early Warning System, that is adopted in the country, but it has to be further improved, and we have to see that each and every person, as and when he desires or she desires, should have the information on early warning in its own language, own format, so that immediate action can be taken by them. While considering all this, India has a responsibility towards the region as a global center. It provides all types of supports, the 4 pillars of early warning system. If you just look at in view of the early warning initiative of WMO and UN and the early warning initiative taken in the country, the observational aspects, the modeling aspects, forecasting aspects, and the early warning dissemination aspects has to be further augmented for the entire region, where India can play a dominant role as it is playing in the last many years. So for this purpose, the capacity building, the hand-holding of the public and the disaster managers and the general stakeholders in the region will be a key to success. As we are discussing the first session today, if you want to save the entire human being, you have to save everyone. It cannot be isolated process. So therefore, India also plans and activates its mechanism to support all the countries, be it South Asia, Southeast Asia, Middle East, Bay of Bengal, Arabian Sea, or the Asia-Pacific region, so that all of us can be geared to meet the challenge of early warning for all initiative. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mahapatra. Your point that we have to go beyond saving lives to also saving the loss of property is really very key. And the point and the struggle that we at NDMA have this time of the season of mesoscale phenomena, isolated, highly localized hazard events, first predicting them, and then issuing targeted warning and not a general purpose warning. It's really something that keeps us awake in the nights during this season. And also the point that, you know, the battle in terms of taking the forecast and warning to the people, dissemination technology hasn't been won yet. We have made a lot of progress, but there is a lot that remains to be done. And your point that, you know, anyone who needs an information almost has a right to it, you know, and we really have to take that sort of an approach that we should be able to serve each and every individual in this country of 1.3 billion people is really the key. With that, now let's zoom out to the region, and I will address you, Mr. Subaya. You work with more than a dozen countries and their Met services. Sometimes one gets this feeling that governments are not investing enough in the Met services themselves. So what is the regional picture you have? You know, what is it that governments are doing in terms of investing in Met services, highlighting, how can we highlight the societal benefits of investing in Met services, not just for the sake of it, but for the sake of people who were sitting here just before this segment. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Kamal Kishore. And in the last 10 years, really a huge development has taken place, particularly in the small countries like our neighboring countries and all. Earlier, they used to provide only 48 hours forecast. Now they all provide seamless way, 5 days, 10 days, seasonal forecast and all. And also, they used to give only national level forecast data. Now they give up to district level and local levels. Though resolution, both the temporal and spatial resolution also increased. And also, there is a way of improving forecast through probabilistic forecast methods like ensemble method, multiple ensemble model approach, collecting forecast data from various sources and then give it to the users and all. So, and also they are now regionally sharing the data, non-GTS data from different countries, and that data goes to the data assimilation to give a better accurate forecast. These are the recent trends developing. And also we have seen that impact-based forecasting also is now being tried, transforming the forecast into actionable information, transforming from what weather will be to what weather will do. That kind of a shift now is happening. But in order to have this kind of mechanism, as you rightly asked the question, how do we really inspire governments and systems to invest in better services, both the observation systems and this forecasting warning, and also the transformation of information into actionable early warning systems, not only for saving lives, but also property, but also preserving infrastructure, other facilities, so that the whole development planning is not seriously impacted by these hazards. The best way to go forward is we need to treat the information as not just for saving lives, but also the information is available for making better use of resources, for example, so that these resources can be, this information can be used to minimize the loss of livelihoods and also the agriculture aspects and all the water resource planning and also public health and also infrastructure disruptions and everything. If you quantify these total losses, not just disaster damage losses, but also the kind of resources which could be otherwise would have lost, the information which is now, anyway we are generating saving lives and livelihoods and all, but the information which are going to be, which can be used also to aid development planning and purposes. If you bring that cost, there will be additional cost element. So that cost will be, now they are saying about saving early warning alone maybe 1:4 kind of a benefit. Now if you add that development dimension, it could be 1:30 dimension, because most of the 30% of the development losses also can be preserved. So if we bring the holistic kind of a thing for a development planning, then we can generate an evidence-based kind of information for the policymakers to invest in the services. So it is both for risk management purposes and resource management purposes. If you are use it, then it will be very compelling reason for the development policy planners to invest in early warning systems. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Subaya. Another quotable quote, that we have to go beyond risk management to resource management. And when I was presenting the Disaster Risk Reduction Working Group's program to the Environment Working Group, one of the suggestions that was made was that early warning system has real-time benefits for how we manage, say, wind energy, and how the need for additional base load can be minimized if we have a better forecast of how the wind will be in a few days from now, and you manage your renewable energy resource using that. It was a fascinating discussion. There was an intervention in the plenary, and then the Danish ambassador came to me and we spoke for half an hour on how we need to begin to look at that. And indeed, if you take all of those things into account and look at the resource management benefits, and not just minimizing the potential losses, but maximizing potential benefits, then the business case for investment in early warning systems, in the capacities of the Met services, in the observational networks, and that's something we'll discuss in the next segment, really becomes very, very strong. So now we've discussed, a few cases from Asia, multi-country cases from Asia. Let's go to South Africa and hear from South Africa.
Thank you, Chair. The advantage of being the last speaker is that everybody has said all what I wanted to say. But nevertheless, with regards to South Africa's early warning systems, The advantage was that when we were commemorating the last target of the International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction, we managed to take stock of how far are we in terms of implementing our early warning systems. And based on that progress, we realized that we have made some progress in terms of ensuring we've built systems around this area. We've developed early warning systems tools, like the Disaster Management Authority. We've got a policy framework that governs us, the Disaster Management Act of 2002, as well as the National Disaster Management Framework of 2005. Based on that, we developed a national indicative risk profile, whereby it allows all our stakeholders to be able to map the risks that are affecting their communities. And once they are mapped, they are able to prioritize the hazards within their specific areas. And what we also did, like the colleagues have said, the issue of impact-based early warning systems. We also partnered with South African Weather Services to ensure that we disseminate impact-based early warning systems, and which also indicate the magnitude, the severity of that particular hazard or that incident that will take place. As my colleague from Japan indicated, that some of the people, they undermine the disseminated early warning systems, but also the cultural aspects, they play a role, because some of the people don't want to move where the areas they are living in because of cultural aspects. But what we do with the early warning systems, we ensure that there are recommendations when they are issued, whether people need to be evacuated immediately. And we also ensure that we workshop our stakeholders on how to interpret, especially for the local communities. And also the dissemination modes, tools that we utilize to ensure that the local people have clear messages. Because yesterday, the people who spoke about simplifying the messages that go out. So we also ensure that the messages are simplified, especially for the target markets. And what we also have is the real-time space data monitoring, because South Africa is part of the international charter as well. So through the opportunities from the monitoring of the Sendai framework targets, we've partnered with the Kingdom of Lesotho, and we've activated the Kingdom of Lesotho through that charter as well. And we've also, through our South African National Space Agency, developed a flood risk profile for the Kingdom of Lesotho. So we have partnered with the Kingdom of Lesotho to ensure that also the border risks are also taken care of. And some of the opportunities that we've got in terms of monitoring the targets of the Sendai framework was the issue of the infrastructure that is being indicated in all the discussions. So with the floods that happened in one of our provinces last year, because we also need to take an opportunity on the seasonal risks to ensure that we have development in our. So through the floods that happened in KZN last year, we looked at the issue of the infrastructure, because most of the houses were damaged, and now they've seen some of the land where they have to move the people so that they don't settle in the vulnerable areas. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And a lot of investment in understanding of risk, but also making that understanding of risk available, understandable, usable by communities at the local level. The investments that you're making in understanding risk and using that for also looking at long-term development planning is quite remarkable. So thank you very much. I think this was a very, very good discussion. I got several quotable quotes out of this, and I think this will stay with me for a long time, Kabuta-san, that the early action does not happen in outer space or on mountain tops where the Doppler radars are, but it happens in communities, and that should be our focus. There are many remaining challenges, mesoscale weather phenomena. How do we go beyond forecasting just the cyclones and the sort of well-established phenomena to highly localized phenomena, and go beyond looking at saving lives to also saving the loss of property. And Subayaji is very interesting, forward-looking call for looking at application of early warning, not just for reducing losses, but also maximizing potential benefits. Thank you very much. I think that gives us a nice segue into the next segment, where we will have a discussion on what is the global discourse on this. And I would like to invite SRSG along with a colleague from UAE, who is from the Office of the Special Envoy for Climate Change in UAE. And we'll have Dr. Paul Egerton from the WMO's Secretary General's Director of the Cabinet. And then we'll have a video message from Mr. Selwyn Hart, who's Special Advisor to UN Secretary General on Climate Action. So maybe SRSG, I can start with you. You've heard what we have in terms of experiences at the community level, optimism, also appreciation for how some of the services have improved and made lives safer at the community level. We heard what the national level actors are dealing with. So in that context, what is the global view you would like to provide us, and what would you like this group to focus on? We know just a few months ago, UNDRR, WMO came up with this call for action, the executive plan for early warning, a $3 billion bill for that. So any reflections from you?
Thank you very much, Kamal. So first of all, let me thank you and the National Disaster Management Authority of India, ADB, and the Resident Coordinator's Office here in India to organize this side event with UNDRR. So I'd like to start by saying that this event is taking place in a very fit-for-purpose place because the airport where all of us landed, the airport of Ahmedabad, this is the birthplace of a very successful early warning, early action approach that India took in terms of extreme heat waves. So this was a program that was led by the National Disaster Management Authorities, which took a real systems approach. And what the result was that in 5 years, between 2015 and 2020, you managed to reduce the mortality by extreme heat waves by 99.8%, which is an extraordinary result. How you did it is that, of course, you issued warnings, but you made a very good compilation of risk information, in particular about the vulnerabilities, and then you set roles and responsibilities of different stakeholders and partners, including the media and hospitals, and you also provided measures that people can protect themselves, especially the most vulnerable people. And that was the reason why you had such an extraordinary result. So this is the kind of systems approach that we need to take with early warning system if we want to be successful globally. Now, where are we? Coming back to your question. So as many of our presenters in previous sessions said, I think things are improving. Things are improving, and that also is showing in what the Sendai Framework Monetary System data is telling us, that as I presented this morning, mortality, excluding COVID, is going down as a trend. And this is in particular for those mortality by disasters which can be predicted with some time. But we also know that it is not enough because currently only half of the member states of the United Nations say that they have a certain level of early warning system. And when you look at least developed countries and the small island developing states, it goes down to 40%. So it is far less than good. And that is why the Secretary General of the United Nations launched, actually, it was around a year ago on the World Meteorological Day, 23rd of March, his Early Warning for All initiative. And we need to make sure that this is early warning for all, meaning not all countries, but everybody on the world. And this needs to be done in 5 years, which is very ambitious, but considering how quickly the frequency intensity of climate-related disasters is hitting us, it is ambitious, but it's something that we need to do. Now, we talked about the 4 elements of the end-to-end early warning system. Of course, early warning system needs to be end-to-end, but it also needs to be multi-hazard. And it also needs to be inclusive. Multi-hazard because, to give you an example, a few months ago I was in the island state of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And if you remember, during COVID, there was a volcanic eruption and also it was hit by a cyclone. So, when I visited it, the other thing that I saw, which was very frightening, was that there's a strip of land between the volcano and the sea, and while you have the volcano behind you, the coastal there's sea rise. So you have so many hazards hitting you at the same time, and that's the reality of many countries. So it does need to be multi-hazard, and it really needs to be inclusive. And this is why, of the 4 elements, the risk information part, which is about vulnerability, exposure, and of course hazard, but importantly vulnerability, and the preparedness on the ground is important. WMO and UNDRR, we co-lead the whole initiative, and each of the 4 pillars have a pillar lead. The risk information is led by UNDRR, the forecasting monitoring by WMO, the communication and dissemination of warning by ITU, and the preparedness on the ground by IFRC, but also agencies such as UNDP, UNEP, UN Women, they are all involved. And importantly, we have the private sector with us too. So we brought in the insurance sector, which has a lot of risk information. We brought in the Global Telecommunication Association, and we also brought in the big tech, Microsoft, which again has also a lot of information, but also a lot of technology to tag what is actually happening. And so just last week, the first advisory panel, which is comprised of the agencies which are involved in this initiative, plus the private sector, were convened. The Secretary General was there. We were in New York. It was a hybrid meeting, and there was a very strong commitment to achieve this ambitious plan. And at that time, we also announced 30 countries with which we will focus our efforts on. 28 of them are either a LDC or a LLDC or a SID. So we are focusing on the countries which are most vulnerable. But the important thing is we're not going to reinvent the wheel, because already there is a lot of cooperation, bilateral and multilateral, which is ongoing. And it's not about starting from scratch. What we're going to do is we're going to go into these 30 countries and look at what is there and understand what the gaps are. Maybe some countries have 3 out of the 4 elements, but not the last one or the second one. And that's where we want to focus. We also don't want to try to make a state-of-the-art early warning, early action, because many of the countries they cannot do it. So what we want to come up with is a basic, or you can call it a minimum requirement for an effective early warning system, and see if at the end of 5 years all countries have this. It is very important that the countries themselves have ownership, because if they don't have ownership, the sustainability will not be there. You might find that after 5 years, you go back to the countries you started with, and they may not be unsustainable. So you need the countries to have ownership. The Secretary General has written to the head of states of these 30 countries, asked them to have ownership, asked them to appoint a senior focal point, and on the ground, the UN resident coordinators' offices and the UN country teams will be the ones which will be in charge of talking with the governments directly and working with them. Now, the price tag of this is $3.1 billion. Is this a lot of money? I don't think so. Because if you think about what is the population of the world, and if we're talking about covering every person, I think the Secretary General of IFRC said it's about, 50 cents per person. And also, when you think about the enormous amount of funding that you need for not only response, but recovery and reconstruction, I mean, just thinking about Pakistan, we need $16 billion for the reconstruction of Pakistan. So we think that $3.1 billion is a good sum, and we need your support for this. We need your support for this, of course, from the donor community, but also from the countries which will be receiving these funds, so that we can really create together a system which is sustainable, which is owned by the countries, and as we have heard, early warning systems need to be enhanced continuously, because unfortunately the crisis, the risk is getting ahead of us. So we also need to make sure that we can catch up or even get ahead of the risk. So that's where we need the support of everyone. It's ambitious, but we are really excited. Sometimes the UN system is criticized for not working as one UN, although we always say one UN. This time we are really trying to be one UN. It's a massive coordination process. And as the number of countries in which we will be focusing increases, the work will be more and more intense. But it is a proven method that will save lives. If a country has an effective multi-hazard early warning systems, the possibility of saving lives is 8 times more. And also talking about economic loss, if you have an effective early warning system, and if the warning can be issued 24 hours before the disaster, the economic loss is calculated as being 30% less. So we do believe that this is effective disaster risk reduction policy, an effective climate adaptation policy, and we would like to take this forward collectively with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Saraji. That's very inspiring. It's indeed ambitious, but I think I don't think we have a choice. And also it is within grasp, it is achievable. I think if we all work together, it's indeed achievable. With that, now let's turn to UAE. Mr. Saud Al Nouri, you will be hosting COP28, and increasingly there is discussion in COPs to give more and more emphasis on adaptation, and good early warning system is seen as an integral element of a good adaptation effort. So from the COP28 presidency's perspective, what would you like to say on collaboration with this endeavor?
It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. I wanted to start off first by saying, and express our deepest condolences for all the victims that were affected by, the lack of early warning systems. Back then, the technology wasn't all there. But right now, we have the technology and we have the capacity to implement this on a global scale. And this is why the COP presidency supports the Secretary General's. Yeah, that's why the COP28 presidency supports the Secretary General's early warning for all initiative. And we also commend the work that the UN DRR is doing and also WMO. You know, we think this is very important work that highlights, you know, the inclusiveness of this challenge. We have to work together as human beings towards one target because it's us against the disaster, it's not the other way around. You know, we're hoping, and we wanted to also highlight that, you know, when we think about early warning systems, that it's also with anticipatory action, that when we have a credible source that there is a disaster that's coming, we should not wait for the disaster to strike. We should take actions in advance, which includes things like cash transfer, high vulnerable families, and even moving livestock to a higher ground. And these preventative actions not only help save lives, but also accelerate the recovery and reduce the risk of unemployment and poverty. Hence, also our actions should focus not only on saving lives, but also livelihoods. And I think you mentioned this before. I think that's a very beautiful statement that you said. Through many of our consultations with a lot of parties and with a lot of constituencies, they mentioned that there's a collective need for people to come together and work together. And we want to be very action-oriented, pragmatic in our approach, and very inclusive when it comes to COP28.
Thank you very much for underlining that, and we are quite looking forward to collaborating with you and making sure that we have very good outcomes from COP28 presidencies. We are very lucky to have today Dr. Paul Egerton joining us from Geneva. He's Director of the Cabinet of the Secretary General of the World Meteorological Organization, organization which has a key role on forecasting, on improving observational networks across the world, fostering collaboration between different meteorological agencies. Dr. Paul Egerton, you heard the discussion in this segment and perhaps in the previous segments as well. There are a lot of expectations from early warning for all initiative of the Secretary General. There's a lot of excitement. There is people are saying it's ambitious, but it's also necessary. What do you have to say to that?
So good afternoon. Hope you can hear me well from Geneva. I'd like to first of all say thank you very much to the Government of India and also to UNDRR for organizing this event with the Disaster Management Agency. I'm very pleased to address you this morning on behalf of Professor Talas, Secretary General, who couldn't be present today. But I'd like to say that we're very supportive of this initiative of the G20 to establish this working group on disaster risk reduction, and especially in relation to the Early Warning for All initiative. As you said, the Early Warning for All initiative has gained a lot of global political visibility over the last few months. We had the announcement by the UN Secretary General on the 23rd World Met Day last year. And since then, we produced a significant executive action plan that SRSG Mitsutori mentioned, which is a $3.1 billion action plan for how to implement early warning across the four pillars. And each of the pillars are very important, and a people-centered approach is right at the heart of this. And since the UN Secretary General announced this, we also had a very significant progress at COP27. We'd worked several months last year with the Egyptian government and with the parties to come out with a political declaration at the end the cover decision of COP, which was one of the first times that we had a cover decision about early warning and systematic observations. And this was supported by the parties of UNFCCC, and it provides a very good mandate for us to move forward with the national partners and local communities and also the financing institutions. This UNSG's initiative has also been mentioned in top-level political meetings such as the UN Security Council recently, where they discussed about sea level rise and the impacts, and also at the G7, which was hosted by Germany last year, there was specific reference to early warning for all. And so G20 is very important organization also to take on board this task with the many countries who are affected by significant climate change. And we see that there are negative indicators through our Global State of the Climate report. We're reaching 1.1 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. We see sea level rise, also melting of significant ice sheets, which will have an effect for thousands of years, in fact, and will cause also significant problems for coastal communities around the world. We also see that there is an impact on temperature, and we try to stay within the Paris limits, but without immediate action, and as IPCC has published this report recently, we're going to be facing significant high impact weather events, such as the cyclones that we've seen affecting various parts of the world and hurricanes. So the Early Warning for All initiative is extremely important to save lives and to protect property, also economies around the world. And as SRSG mentioned, we've identified 30 countries which we believe are critical LDCs and SIDS for immediate action and support. Although we're also working with groups of other countries on trying to enhance early warning capacities. And UNSG has written to these 30 countries and asked to cooperate with UNDRR, WMO, and our key partners, ITU, IFRC, UNDP, UNEP, and others, as we've mentioned, even the private sector. One of the things that I'd like to emphasize is the finance part of it, because we can't do any of this really without having the right finance in place and investments in place to invest in improving early warning systems in many countries. And we need to look to about 100 countries, because only about 50% of our WMO members actually have significant early warning systems in place. And there are different parts of the chain that need to be addressed. As Mami Mitsutori mentioned, the risk, the observations, the communications, and the responsiveness. Now, we already have, and you'll hear in the next segment, a number of financial instruments available, some of which are new. We set up the Systematic Observations Financing Facility, SOF, and you'll hear from Dr. Repnik about this initiative soon. And we've started to capitalize that, and already funding has started to go towards groups of countries identified as priorities for readiness phase funding, and also and then going into the infrastructure phase. We've also had a very successful initiative called CRUISE, the Climate Risk and Early Warning System Initiative. And this has had significant investment, more than 100 million euros, and covering many countries. And we'd like to see deeper transformation. And in fact, the three key words really are scaling up, prioritizing, and accelerating action, because we need to move fast on this. We're into the first year, and in fact, we really need to move fast in the pipeline, because normally this takes a long time to discuss with the countries, to find out requirements, but we all need to work together on accelerating this to meet the UN Secretary General's target. There's also a need to work together with the other financial institutions, and Green Climate Fund has been very positive about its role in the Early Warning for All initiative and is looking at trying to scale up cruise investments. But also we're working with them on a general agreement to see how they can support early warning for all globally, perhaps through a number of regional platforms. And then we're engaging with regional development banks and with other funds like GEF and CIF and the World Bank. So all of those are existing, but we need to align them together in support of early warning for all umbrella. Finally, I'd like to say that WMO and its national meteorological and hydrological services are extremely important in this because they're normally the national authorities that issue warnings together with the emergency management agencies. And it's important that they have the capacity, they have the products, they have the training and the skills for forecasting and access to global products. And we're embarking on trying to also carry out training for those meteorological services and hydrological services that require training in the coming months to really see where we can make a difference. We're working very closely with the incoming COP28 presidency, and we're very pleased to work with UAE on this. My Secretary General has met with the incoming presidency, and they're very supportive of the Early Warning for All initiative and reporting back to COP28 later in the year. And also finally, the UN Secretary General has mentioned about a climate ambition summit, which will take place around the General Assembly in September time. And this will be an important also opportunity to emphasize about both the global climate agenda, but also about the adaptation agenda and how we can contribute through the Early Warning for All initiative. So we'd like to thank you for this initiative from the G20. WMO is very pleased to participate and engage in this, and also working with our very core partners, UNDRR, ITU, IFRC, UNDP, UNEP, our private sector partners in the context of the advisory panel from the UN Secretary General. So we're very pleased, and we're in the same building actually in Geneva, UNDRR and WMO, and we're really working very closely together on trying to make this a success. But we need your engagement, we need the community's engagement, and it needs to be people focused, because though people are really the focus of the impacts of this extreme weather, both through mortality losses and also economic losses as well. So I'll leave it there for now. Thank you very much for this opportunity to address you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Egerton. It is very heartening to know that this effort is getting high-level political support from across the board, UNFCCC parties, UN Security Council, G7, G20, and many others. I'm sure this will all enable us to scale, prioritize, and accelerate action on early warning for all. It's clear that for a 5-year plan, the first year is really critical, and that coincides with our presidency. So I think there is really a lot we have to do together in this year. So thank you very much for that. I think with that, we can conclude this segment. Thank you, SRSG. Thank you, the representative from COP28 presidency. And thank you for joining from Geneva. We have, before we segue to the next segment, we also have a message from, a video recorded message from Mr. Selwyn Hart. He is Special Advisor to the United Nations Secretary General on Climate Action.
Excellencies, colleagues, and friends. First of all, I would like to thank the government of India for their leadership in making early warning and early action a key priority for their G20 presidency. This leadership comes at a critical time as we are at a defining moment in our fight against the climate crisis. Global emissions are at their highest level in human history, and they continue to rise. Credible pathways to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius and prevent the worst impacts are narrowing with each passing day of insufficient action to cut carbon pollution. Adaptation limits are being breached. The scale and magnitude of losses and damages are growing exponentially. Billions of lives are hanging in the balance. The IPCC census report reveals that over 3 billion people are already highly vulnerable to climate change. Between 2010 and 2020, human mortality from floods, droughts, and storms was 15 times higher in highly vulnerable regions. Over the past 50 years, nearly 70% of all deaths from climate-related disasters occurred in the 46 poorest countries. This is happening at just 1.1 degrees Celsius of warming. Even if the world succeeds in limiting temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius, we all know that much worse is yet to come. It is unacceptable that the countries and peoples that have contributed the least to creating this crisis are paying the heaviest price. We must reverse this injustice. And this starts with ensuring that everyone has the basic tools to protect themselves from climate disasters. Last year, the Secretary General launched the Early Warning for All initiative with an ambitious goal to ensure that every person on Earth is protected with such systems by 2027. 2023 must be the year for implementation and the acceleration of action. The Secretary General has set out an acceleration agenda calling for all countries to rapidly reduce emissions and deliver climate justice to those on the front lines of the climate crisis. The Early Warnings for All initiative is a key contribution to his acceleration agenda. Excellency colleagues, providing universal multi-hazard early warning systems for all is long overdue. I urge the members of the G20 for their political, financial, and technical support. 30 highly vulnerable developing countries have been identified for focused attention and support during the first year of the initiative's implementation. Its success now depends on all of us cooperating and collaborating and working together in a way that we have not done before. Let us avoid duplication, overlap, and creating unnecessary bureaucracy. Instead, let's build on existing mechanisms. The Climate Ambition Summit of the Secretary General in September, as well as the G20 Leaders Summit, represent key political milestones for us to assess progress. This is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to truly make a difference in the lives of the climate vulnerable. Let's seize it. I thank you.
Thank you. Let's seize this. With that, we move to the next segment, which will be facilitated by Dr. Charlie Benson from ADB.
Thank you very much, Kamal, and I hope you're all doing all right. It's been quite a long session so far. If you want to just stand up for a minute and stretch, please go ahead. I need to pick up a pen anyway, so I won't see who's standing up and stretching. Okay, so I'll just start here and then I'll come and join you guys. We've obviously heard a lot about the purpose, the critical importance of end-to-end multi-hazard early warning systems that are robust, that are timely, that are well communicated, that are actionable. And we've also begun to hear a little bit about financing, because of course you can't put these in place without adequate financing to ensure that they're both fully operational and that they continue to be so as we go ahead with new technology taken into account and rapidly introduced. So that's the focus of this segment of this side event. We're going to talk about financing in a little bit more detail. I'm focusing particularly on efforts to ensure that financing is delivered to scale, that the different financing initiatives are well aligned, that they are easily accessible, that people can actually access the financing that's available, and that that financing is used as effectively as possible. The resources are ultimately limited relative to the huge scale of need. We are going to begin with a round of questions to our 5 panelists, and if time permits, we're then going to have a short panel discussion as well. So we have 5 panelists. I think, yep, we have 3 joining us virtually and 2 people here in person. I am going to introduce them as we go along in the interest of time, and I will just transition over to here to begin that dialogue. Okay, can you hear me? Yes, that's working, great. Okay, so we're going to just, as I say, just jump straight in as we're a little tight for time at this point. And we're going to begin with one of our virtual participants, with Marcus Repnick. Marcus is the director of the Systematic Observations Financing Facility Secretariat, the SOF. We've just heard a little bit about the SOF. Marcus, the SOF was launched last year, I think in July, to support LDCs and SIDS improve their weather observation infrastructure. Can you just tell us a little bit about how SOF differs from, but also overlaps and aligns with other financing initiatives available for early warning, and also whether it's easy to access? Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues. Pleasure to be with all of you. Charlotte, let me start with the question about alignment, because SOF is fully aligned, fully complementary, and is a foundational element of the Early Warnings for All initiative, and actually the broader investments, as we previously touched upon, on related to climate and sustainable development. Why? Because we are a single-purpose United Nations fund, doing only one thing, namely supporting countries in closing their today's massive weather and climate data gaps. Today, LDCs and SIDS are generating less than 10% of the internationally agreed and mandated basic weather and climate data. And we are doing this in an integrative manner, bringing together all relevant stakeholders. I'm pleased to see dear friends in this panel, namely Joseph from the GCF, James from the African Development Bank, and of course, John from Cruz, as well as a colleague from REAP, because all you have been in a position to jointly develop SOF and now implement SOF. So fully complementary, fully foundational. How do we differ? We differ in 2 ways. We differ in the way how we provide finance, and we differ in the way how we provide technical assistance. We differ in the way how we provide finance, and this goes back, Kamal, to your guiding question at the beginning. Who is footing the bill? SOF is providing grant finance only. No need for countries to indebt themselves. SOF is providing long-term, open-ended finance beyond today's traditional project investment cycles. And third, SOF is tackling the elephant in the room of financing, namely providing long-term substantial support for the operation and maintenance of the basic national observing systems. Why are we doing this? Because we acknowledge that the data generated by the poorest and most vulnerable countries are important for the countries, but they're important for the whole globe. These data constitute a global public good. So SOF, in short, is a global public goods financing mechanism. We differ not only in the way we provide finance, we also differ in the way we provide technical assistance. Instead of individual consultants flying in and flying out, we established a peer-to-peer institutional long-term technical assistance framework. Actually, 26 countries have offered the Met offices and Met services to provide this technical assistance, from Met office to Met Office, because only the Met officers know what it takes to run and maintain an observing system. I want to make reference to the previous interventions. I want to acknowledge Dr. Mohapatra from India, because the Indian Meteorological Department has been at the forefront of inventing this approach. I also want to acknowledge South Africa and Indonesia, because also their Met services are part of these 26 peer advisors. So provision of technical assistance, long-term again, institutional relationship of Met Office to Met Office. So we might differ, and we differ, but we're integral element of the climate finance architecture, integral element of the Early Warnings for All initiative. Now, Charlotte, your second question, ease of access. The answer is yes, ease and speedy access. And second, stop acting as a catalyst to crowd in additional finance. Later today, actually in 2 hours, the fourth soft steering committee will meet. And it's expected that they decide funding for the first group of 26 countries. Now, only in November last year, these 26 countries have been programmed. So actually in 4 months' time, countries are moving from being programmed to receive support, developing a funding request, and today funding expected to be approved for 26 countries. By the way, by June, 55 countries, among them all 30 countries, all 30 priority countries of the UN Early Warnings for All initiative. So it's easy access and it's speedy access. And stop acting as a catalyst. How? Because we are working with 8 implementing entities, including the African Development Bank, that might bring in additional resources from the African Development Bank or additional resources crowded in from colleagues like in institutions like the Green Climate Fund. So while SOF provides funding for the very first part of the meteorological value chain, single purpose, closing the observation gap, at the same time, we are working with the countries, with the implementing entities, and with the funds, and the funds, including CRUISE, to ensure that actually SOF crowds in additional resources to ensure that the data generated reach the famous last mile, reach the communities whose speakers we have been hearing in the beginning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marcus. Clearly a really excellent initiative, grants, open-ended, access to financing, the peer-to-peer learning scheme that you outlined, which is going to be extremely valuable, easy, speedy access. This sounds really excellent, and we really look forward to hearing how it progresses as you move forward. You mentioned GCF, so perhaps it would be a good moment to turn to our next panelist, Joseph Insterval, who is the Senior Climate Information and Early Warning Specialist at the Green Climate Fund. So Joseph, hydromet agencies often really stretch for capacity, and they lack the time, the resources to put in really solid applications for funding to expand, to improve their systems. What measures is the GCF taking to encourage and to support such applications? And as part of your answer, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about the innovative scaling up framework, which you're currently developing with CRUISE, with the Climate Risk Early Warning System Secretariat, precisely to speed up access to GCF funding. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Excellencies, distinguished invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. I bring you warm greetings from the Green Climate Fund. I would like to thank the organizers for inviting us to participate in this very important event. The GCF is an operating entity of the UNFCCC, fostering paradigm shift to low emission climate resilient development. We have invested over $12 billion of our own fund with the potential to avoid 2.5 billion tons of CO2, $12 billion of our funds with the potential to avoid 2.5 billion tons of CO2 and build the resilience of 912 million people. As the earlier presenters have highlighted, climate-related disasters have become a major threat to the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals. If you look at the recent report by WMO and UNDRR, talks about 75% of countries who report having multi-hazard early warning systems, having well assessed their system to be limited to moderate achievements. They also call for increased funding across all the 4 interconnected elements of a multi-hazard early warning system. So this is very clear that the existing capacity of developing countries to manage disaster risk is not sufficient and calls for a paradigm shift, an integrated and comprehensive approach to design and implement fit-for-purpose early warning system, one that is people-centered, end-to-end, impact-based multi-hazard early warning system. And so this presents an opportunity for the GCF in terms of making an impact on the ground. We have established a framework for paradigm-shifting investment pathways. We believe that modernizing hydromet service is very important to provide the relevant science-based information that feeds into multi-hazard early warning and early action system, but also importantly, the information that will enable infrastructure design and resilience financing. And the drivers to shift this paradigm shift will require transformational planning and programming, catalyzing innovation, the mobilization of finance at scale, as well as coalition and knowledge to scale up successes. And so this requires critical capacity that currently the developing countries don't have. So the GCF has put together a support facility that enables the technical support to countries. First, it's provided the support for preparation of funding proposal through the readiness program, where countries can access up to $3 million. It also has a project preparatory facility where countries and accredited entities can access up to $1.5 million to prepare the core elements of the funding proposal. And of course, we also have a direct access entity technical assistance facility that supports the development of projects. We also have a number of capacity development initiatives, regional structured dialogues, where we bring countries together within a region, global programming conference where we pull together the global community and other events. But in terms of investment windows or modalities, we have the simplified approval process where countries can access up to $25 million to prepare their projects. We also have enhanced direct access modality, which enables up to $20 million, as well as the traditional modality, which has a range of funding opportunity that is larger than the 2 that I've spoken about. So we have come up with a structured approach to fast track the development of early warning systems. We are piloting this process. We think that within 6 months, we should be able to support countries to build the ideas, the concept note, through the process of review and approval. So we think this is a very significant opportunity to fast track the process, to support countries to be able to build better systems that are fit for the type of challenges that we are facing. But then going on to the collaboration with CRUISE, we are very much excited about collaboration with CRUISE to develop a framework for scaling up successful CRUISE projects and activities in climate information and early warning systems. And more importantly, we believe that the collaboration will see essential potential benefits for our accredited entities and also direct access entities, most of all the countries that CRUISE and GCF supports. Scaling up access to fit-for-purpose early warning system is crucial, especially for Africa, LDCs, and SIDS, where penetration of the systems are very low. So we think that this partnership is very, very important, but we expect the following tangible benefits to emerge from the scaling up process. First, the framework will focus on principles and criteria that will define where there is evidence that the projects implemented by CRUISE are producing clear benefits on the ground. Secondly, the framework will ensure that there is country ownership in the scaling up process and alignment with the strategies and development agendas of the countries. And thirdly, the framework will consider the sustainability of scaled up investment as a key criteria, as the meaningful involvement of private sector and adoption of financing approaches. It is important also to stress that this facility is for all GCF accredited entities, but particularly paying attention to the unique needs of the direct access entities. So we are very much excited working with Cruise, and we look forward to working with other accredited entities and other partners to undertake this scale-up process. Our aim is to start the piloting of the scaling up of Cruise process, getting to the latter part of the year, and then we'll ramp up in terms of fast-tracking support up to 2027. And thank you very much for the opportunity to provide my input.
Thank you very much, Joseph. Not least, it's very heartening to hear that recognition on the part of GCF that the mere fact that there's a fund that exists that can support early warning systems isn't enough, that measures are needed to ensure that hydromet agencies and others are indeed accessing those resources and is being supported to do so. This is probably the right moment to turn to Cruise itself. We've heard of Cruise being mentioned a few times. We have with us today John Harding. John is the head of Cruise, the Climate Risk Early Warning System Secretariat. So John, how can we ensure that effective financing is available at scale for end-to-end early warning systems? And what is Cruise specifically doing to help LDCs and SIDS advance their current systems? Thank you.
Thank you, and good afternoon, colleagues. I hope you're surviving this onslaught of information, that it is actually useful for you. I'll be succinct, and I also hope that you've understood by now that when we are talking about financing for early warning, on the one hand, we have this tremendous progress that has been made, in particular by G20 countries, in observing, monitoring, predicting, issuing warnings to their population. And on the other hand, that access to those kind of services and tools is not universal. And we have evidence now, and that was referred to by the SRSG or UNDRR. Now we have evidence that clearly links the capacity of countries to predict and monitor these kind of extreme events, or in UNDR language, we call it target G of Sendai. So we have evidence that links that target with the casualty risk. So that's the risk of losing your life to disasters, or target A in UNDR language. And this, recently UNDR produced a report which shows that there's a number of countries where those systems are not in place, and that's the accepted explanation for what is basically an unacceptable fact. And that has to very much drive our financing priorities. There's a fact that the least developed countries and the small island development states still do not have access to these types of systems and capacities. It's also an important message for us as financing mechanisms, in as much that we, when we put in place the systems, the metrics to show what success will look like, the ultimate success for everything we do and the investments we do in this area is going to have to be measured against the reduction loss of livelihoods and lives in countries. And that's something that we have to build into our systems. So as you will have understood, I currently manage one of these financing mechanisms, the Cruise, and we're specifically expected to step in and help bridge that capacity gap on early warning in LDCs and SIDS under this early warning for all plan. I can tell you that we're approaching that challenge very humbly. It's not going to be easy. We've heard the term's ambitious. It is a great opportunity, but it's also going to be extremely challenging. And we're working with our partners, our implementing partners, and our members to make sure that the modalities we put in place are fit for purpose. But one thing I'm absolutely certain is that we will not be able to succeed in this endeavor if we don't have the G20 countries fully behind us. And we're fortunate. We know we have already 6 G20 countries that are contributing to our initiative. The latest countries to come on board are Canada and the European Commission, and so that's obviously very encouraging. But the main, I think, area where we see the potential for scaling up the work here in the context of the G20 discussions. And I'd like to come back here to the point raised by my colleague Marcus earlier on, is if we can make sure that the technical assistance, the cooperation, the technologies that are available within G20 countries are made available to least advanced economies. And that's the modality, what we see as a very successful modality of cooperation. We heard the example of South Africa and supporting the countries within their region. Some of our most successful projects, we developed from scratch a drought early warning system in Papua New Guinea, and this was done entirely through technical cooperation with the Bureau of Meteorology from Australia. And we have many examples of that sort. So that's really what we would like to see come out of these G20 discussions. We'd certainly like to serve as a catalyst to those types of cooperation moving forward. And just to finish, Charlie, we've heard a lot about these principles that are going to have to drive our financing approaches. We've understood that we have to ensure that we finance all the 4 elements of an early warning system. In a balanced manner. We heard from Marcus the importance of the observation networks, but we're also going to have to make sure that we're able to respond to the needs when it comes to risk knowledge. When it comes to the communicating early warnings, when it comes to the preparedness to respond. And here, what's very important is that that we should build into our financing mechanism that flexibility to be able to address where that weakest link is in the national system. But more importantly, is that those priorities are identified by the national and local institutions themselves, and that they actually drive the institution. And that's obviously something that drives us, is to make sure that we can respond to those needs as they're identified by the countries themselves. So these are some of the principles. We heard about the importance of people-centered approaches that we try to bring into our business model, the importance of bringing in gender-sensitive dimensions into early warning systems. So for us, the big challenge now is translating those principles of effective financing into our operations. And that's something we'll very much look forward to the outcomes of this G20 work stream, and that we're hoping there'll be some very tangible and actionable recommendations that we then can also build into our financing mechanisms. I'll stop here for now. Charlie, back.
Thank you very much, John. Perhaps we would go straight to James, building on that. James, you're the Chief of Climate and Policy at the African Development Bank. Could you tell us a little bit about what the African Development Bank is doing to support strong institutional and policy frameworks, as well as supporting your countries to put in place adequate financing? John's mentioned briefly, these wider considerations, and it all needs to come together. I don't think we've really talked too much so far about institutions in particular this afternoon so far. Over to you. Thank you, James.
Thank you, Charlie. Let me just thank you very much. Let me update my introduction a little bit. I am actually now the manager of the Climate and Development Special Fund for Africa, and I am also now the new coordinator of the Climate Action Window here at the bank. So thanks a lot for inviting us to this early warning, early action event. We thank the Indian NDMA, the UNDRR, and also the Asian Development Bank for pulling this event together, and we would be happy to contribute. I think we are participating at a time when, let me say that with the description of Marcus, that we are facing a huge data and capacity gap for hydromet here in Africa. And on the delivery side, we know that only 4 in 10 people are covered by early warning systems here in Africa. So we have a massive gap of 60% of the continent is not covered by early warning systems. That's close to 840 million people out of the 1.4 billion people that reside on the continent. Now, let me also say that I think as a partner within the early warning initiative, the bank is working aggressively in those three areas that you mentioned, Charlie, on institutional support, on policy frameworks, and also on building the capacity for financing early warning systems. Let me quickly start by institutional support and say, at the moment, through the Climate and Development Special Fund, we've deployed nearly $74 million in grants over the last 10 years to support regional climate centers that are WMO accredited here in Africa to undertake what Joseph called a modernization of hydromet observations. And a lot of these observations are being modernized with a keen eye on providing early warning systems. And so within these centers, we have provided support for modernization of infrastructure. But we have also in the process also created 2 new centers here in Africa. We have built a completely new center for the IGAD region in East Africa that is serving 11 countries. And we have recently last year commissioned the new center for Central Africa that is also serving 10 countries in that region. In addition to that, we are working very closely with National Meteorological and Hydrological Services. As we understand, these are the basic centers for developing, providing, and delivering early warning systems in the countries. And through this technical support over the last 10 years, we have supported National Meteorological and Hydrological Services in 17 countries. We have also supported other institutions and communities to bring them up to date or up to standard in terms of the provision of weather and climate services. In terms of policy frameworks, let me mention quickly, we are working through the Africa Working Group on Disaster Risk Reduction together with the African Union, the UNDRR here in Africa, on the implementation of the Plan of Action for Africa under the Sendai framework. And I'm happy to report that under this several initiatives that we have undertaken over the last 4 or 5 years, we have now developed the Multi-Hazard Early Warning System Center for the African Union that now provides alerts for the entire region. We have also worked with the regional economic communities and created multi-hazard early warning centers for the regional climate centers. Through that initiative, we are also working with the centers to advance what we call the climate outlook forums that share information on seasonal outlook and develop consensus forecasts. Before the COVID hit in 2020, we were working with the World Bank and the UNDRR on the regional hydromet forums. We had already held 4 of these in Africa that were advancing our work in sharing risk knowledge. So that was very important, and also in advancing risk financing mechanisms. So we think that if we consolidate our efforts in those areas that we have already started to invest, it would be an excellent platform for us going ahead on this ambition of delivering early warning for all in the next 5 years. Let me also quickly move to the financing. This one is a little bit challenging, but let me say, many partners are working with us on this. Let me appreciate the work of Cruise Early Warning, the work of WISER here in Africa, the Clean Debt Special Fund itself that I manage, together with our sister institution here at the bank, which is the Africa Disaster Risk Financing Initiative that works together with the Africa Risk Capacity to support countries to access sovereign risk tools. And from our side, we are helping to build the national contingency plans that go into mainstreaming the sovereign risk tools and supporting countries to access sovereign risk insurance. We've seen in many aspects that sovereign risk insurance has supported many countries. We know now the case of Malawi that has just had significant impacts from Hurricane Freddy, the most historic tropical cyclone on record. I was very pleased to, at the beginning of the segment, to learn about the tremendous work that has been done in Bangladesh to reduce their exposure. 1 million loss of 1 million lives in 1970s with the tropical cyclones. They managed to reduce that to almost 300,000 in the 80s, and now they're down to almost no losses at all when a tropical cyclone hits. In Malawi, of course, we know that more than nearly 600 people have lost their lives, 500,000 have been displaced, 500 more are still missing. So we really have a lot of lessons to learn from some of these countries that have already put in place early warning systems that are very important. We are focusing here on 6 areas of early warning systems to provide under drought, flooding, including flash flooding, the tropical cyclone warnings, warnings for pests and diseases in croplands, and also warnings that will be related to air quality, and especially also forest fires. At the bank, we try to make sure that even within our main investment portfolio, we are allocating 40% of that as climate finance. Between 2020 and 2021, we were able to allocate $4.9 billion in climate finance, out of which $2.9 billion was allocated as adaptation finance, and a significant part of that, at the moment we are estimating about 300 to 350 million, went towards supporting the foundational elements of building early warning systems, and especially to the Hydromet Agency. We have a number of programs planned now. We think that we are going to, within the next 3 or 4 years, deliver a program of early warning for food security and nutrition in 25 countries, working with the what we call the Africa Adaptation Acceleration Program under the Global Center for Adaptation in Africa. We also think that our new climate action window, which is very exciting, we have been able to mobilize $429 million from an initial 4 donors. And we think that there's a significant part of that is programmed to go towards supporting early warning systems here in Africa. I think the initial $30 million will be programmed this year in 2023, and we shall program more finances for the 37 African countries that receive that benefit from the African Development Fund from 2024 going forwards. So I think let me stop there at the moment, and we will reflect more on this if there are questions or suggestions as we go ahead. And thanks a lot, Charlie. Back to you.
Thank you very much, James, and great to hear about your very significant program of work, but clearly much more to be done across Africa by many partners coming together, with 60% still of the population not covered by early warning systems. I'd like to shift now to our last panelist, last but not least, Riel Ahmed, who is Senior Climate Change Policy Advisor at the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office of the UK, on secondment from the British Red Cross. So, Riel, you work on early action. Early action provides people imminently threatened by natural hazards to take evasive action ahead of time. And you're involved in the Risk-Informed Early Action Partnership, referred to as REAP. Now, REAP has set a goal of $500 million investment in early warning systems, infrastructure and institutions, specifically to target early action. Is that goal being matched by the scale of available, accessible financing for your partners? And if not, what challenges are the partners, the members, facing?
Firstly, it's really, really great to be here. We've talked about it before, and we all know that effective early warning systems that are people-centered can protect the most vulnerable people from the impacts of climate change. But early warning systems are only effective if they lead to early action. So in terms of the question, so REAP's goal of 500 million investment in early warning systems, infrastructure and institutions to target early action, and if that goal matches the scale and availability of financing. So there's been huge progress made in recent years. we heard about the work that Cruise and GCF are doing to increase the accessibility of financing and increase country ownership as well. Also the UNSG's Early Warning for All initiative and SOF. And these initiatives all have the opportunity to really fast track progress on us being able to act ahead of disasters. But what's been highlighted by various publications, by REAP, and also flagged by its partners, is that much more is needed around REAP's second target. This is on the need for more pre-agreed financing. So to make progress, I want to talk about 3 areas. So firstly, it's on the access. So we know that local actors are facing huge barriers in being able to access the financing that they need. So we need to do much more to break down these barriers as a community. Secondly, we need to be starting to work better across the different sectors, so across humanitarian sector, development sector, climate sectors. There's been lots of collaborations there, and one example is with Cruise and the agreements that they have with the Red Cross movement to make sure that they're systematically involved in their programming and have a role and can be able to provide their inputs. And other examples of financing that can be utilized is, for example, crisis modifiers in development programs. And then lastly, and we've had this before as well, but we really do need to do more to try and incentivize involvement from the private sector. And this goes beyond just capital. It's also around utilizing their experience, their technical knowledge, their skills as well. And of course, working with the academic community as well. So I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Real. And you remind us, very importantly at this point, in this side event, that early warnings are only effective if they lead to action. And a reminder that in turn that takes us into the space of humanitarian response, of development, of a wider set of factors. This isn't just about hydromet agencies and ensuring that they are sufficiently financed. We have actually 1 minute left. If I may, just take a few extra minutes. Yes, I have a nod here. Just a very quick fire round of further questions to each of the panelists with about 30 seconds of response. We've heard now that various financing mechanisms are in place, are being put in place. They're new. Many of them are relatively new, but clearly so far the financing available through these facilities is not enough. So if I may very quickly, just maybe perhaps start with you, John, with a very nasty question. How much funding do we need to ensure we have end-to-end early warning systems across the globe and to maintain those on a regular basis to keep them fully functionable and using the most up-to-date technology? Give us a number.
Well, I have an easy answer because now we have put a price tag on the early warning for all, and that's 3.1 billion. But so that's the easy answer. But no, the fact is that we as a rule of thumb, we're not that good actually currently at actually putting a cost on our early warning needs, and maybe that could be one of the outcomes of this work stream and of the working group of the G20 was actually to create a sort of early warning taxonomy where we more systematically are able to track the costs of early warning. But the one way of actually doing it is to look. Early warning is a public service and primarily funded by public funds. And so you can look you can look at some of the more advanced G20 countries, how much per capita or per inhabitant do they invest in for example, in national meteorological and hydrological services. So you can see countries countries, and that will vary quite a lot. Within G20 countries, you'll have countries in Europe and other countries, they put between $4 and $5 per inhabitant per year into the cost of the National Meteorological Service, and that will go down by quite, some of the emerging economies, but still in the G20, it will be a small percentage of that, often less than $1 per inhabitant cost. But when we go to a least developed country in Africa, $100 million. So if you just how many inhabitants do you have in India? if you look per inhabitant, it's not a perfect methodology, Kamal. Exactly, and that's just one part of the element. So it's not a perfect methodology, but it gives us a scale of how much certain countries are investing. But it also shows us that in some countries in Africa, we're talking like very, very a fraction of that of public funds are currently being invested. And SRSG Mami Muzatori was talking about what are that basic capacities that we need to put in place in those countries. This can give us one approach to try and cost what those basic capacities would actually be in those countries.
Thank you, John. And actually, that 3.1 billion, I understand, is only to 2027. That's just the start of a very long journey. So you mentioned Africa. Maybe, James, we could jump to you then. Have you any sense of how much financing is needed to put adequate early warning systems in place across the region?
No, thanks, Charlie. I mean, the estimates we have now for the countries to implement their nationally determined contributions, of which, early warning would be a subset of the adaptation plans within their NDCs, is about 1.2 to 1.4 trillion. And these resources need to be delivered at the rate of about $60 billion a year for the period 2020-2030. So we need roughly about $40 billion going to adaptation every year. And out of that, if you assume about 10% would be the foundational elements for early warning. So we need about $10 billion a year in financing in Africa. I think the amount of climate finance that is flowing to Africa now, it's about what? It's about 20 billion a year. That is far less than we would need to sustain an effort on early warning for all. So we need to ramp up our resource mobilization for that effort. Thanks, Charlie.
Thank you. Let's turn to you, Marcus. I don't know whether this is a simpler question for you, just focusing on adequate weather observation infrastructure. Do you have a number globally?
Yes, we have, and the number is 400 plus. As part of the UN Early Warnings for All initiative, our funding needs are 400 million over the next 5 years to bring all 76 LDCs and SITs to compliance with the basic weather and climate information data provision. We would need then on an annual basis about $50 million for the so-called compliance support. So to make substantial support, provide substantial support to countries for operating and maintenance. Where do we stand? We have mobilized within our first year of existence 65 million. So we still have a massive financing gap. And last point, we're getting massive support, a massive demand to expand soft financial support also to mid-income countries, including at COP in Sharm el-Sheikh, the SABSTA conclusion. But of course, this would require additional resources. So 400 million programmed as part of the Early Warnings for All initiative until 27, 50 million on an annual basis thereafter, plus if we expand support to mid-income countries.
Thank you. Thank you. So smaller, but still significant numbers. So sorry to put you, Joseph, on the spot, but how much has GCF so far provided, and what's in the pipeline, just very briefly?
Okay, thank you very much. At the moment, we have over $1.2 billion in our pipeline, about 123 countries. And we have a structure where we have looked at how much is needed, at least to enable countries to have the essentials. taking some of the estimates that WMO and others are providing, we think that the SAP, which is up to $25 million, will be a good starting point where we can leverage additional finance. So it all depends on the number of countries, the size of the countries, and the categorization within the WMO GFCS hydromet and early warning system categorization. So it depends on how one looks at the investment that is required. Very, very difficult to estimate at the moment, but we believe that the $25 million is a good starting point and an opportunity where we could use this per country to scale up the investment that we have. And of course, we also think that within our pipeline, which is over $1.5 billion, we think that the need for resource mobilization is very important. Resourcing the GCF is very, very critical to enable this investment to be done. And so it's important that GCF is resourced enough to enable some of these investments to drive the deployment and implementation of the initiative. And more importantly, also, we think that countries are at different stages of development. Some have systems that we think we can scale up. Some have systems that we think we can optimize. And some of them have nothing at all. Those are below what the WMO has classified as the basic that needs to be met. And so we have 3 levels that we need to work together to leverage what already exists, scale them up, and the final optimization formula that will enable us to meet those challenges. So within our framework, we think 25 million is a good starting point per country, and then we can leverage additional finance depending on the complexity of the country level. Thank you.
Thank you. And Real, just turning to you finally, obviously for early action, we're talking really about humanitarian budgets rather than budgets for hydromet services. And humanitarian budgets are incredibly tight, tighter than ever at the moment. Do you think sufficient resources will be put in place to really allow you to expand early action programs to the extent that there is needed?
I mean, like, as you said, the gap between needs and the financing available is huge, and this is only going to increase with climate change and increasing impacts and increasing frequency and intensity of disasters that we're seeing. So it's so important that we are ring-fencing humanitarian funding for the most dire situations. But there's 2 things that we can focus on to make sure we're making the most out of the funding that's available, also acknowledging that more funding is needed as well. So firstly, it's focusing on the most vulnerable, so the most vulnerable countries, but also the most vulnerable communities within those vulnerable countries. And that includes communities who are living in conflict-affected areas as well. You know, I saw some data around how countries that are most climate vulnerable and are most fragile do seem to get a smaller slice of the pie when it comes to climate financing. And this is a huge issue that we need to make progress on. And the second thing is, like I mentioned earlier, we need to make use of all the pots of funding that is available to us, not just humanitarian funding, but also look at climate financing and development financing as well, where it's relevant. And I'll probably just stop there, looking at the time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And, you know, an alarming thought that we're going to have to focus on the most dire situations only. That will leave many, many people very vulnerable and exposed. So on that note, though, I mean, I think just to conclude very, very briefly, there are clearly some very important initiatives now underway to bring financing to bear on early warning systems. This is good progress, but it's clearly not enough. A lot more financing needs to be moved into this space. And we hope very much that through the G20 Disaster Risk Reduction Working Group, we can, as a group, help take things further forward. So on that note, I will hand back to Kamal. And many thanks to the 5 panelists for a great discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I do realize that it has been a marathon session. I see that we're losing some audience as well. So we'll try to wrap it up very quickly. This is intense discussion, but important discussion which needs to be had. Before I invite Ambassador Stefan Cruzat to give a summary, there's a launch of a compendium put together by UNESCAP of good practices on early warning systems. So I will ask Mr. Sanjay Srivastava from UNESCAP to come and say a few words about it, and then we can just have its release.
Thank you, Kamal, distinguished colleagues on the dais. We have brought one compendium. This compendium basically is like UN Goal 17, Goal for Partnership. So all UN agencies you see, including RIMES, our partner agencies, we have brought the good practices that involves G20 member country, and those practices particularly focused on the cooperation, how the G20 country initiatives beyond the countries and helped many other countries, and especially the low capacity LDC countries to achieve self-sufficiency. Next slide, can you put me? So we have looked at this compendium from 6 perspectives where G20 countries have made a very, very important contribution. For example, we start with political commitment, the commitment of G20 member countries which have made difference. I will cite some example. Innovative financing, you have heard many examples in the session. There are areas of service provision and institution building which G20 has made contribution, data and technology exchange, transboundary advocacy and actions, and tripartite arrangements. Just a snapshot of where, the snapshot of, for example, if I take the political commitment, I'm very happy that Dr. Radia is here from Indonesia. ASEAN member country, they take a 2nd generation early warning system. That is what is called anticipatory action, a regional framework of ASEAN member country. They have taken early warning one step ahead. So this is Tsunami Trust Fund. This is a UNESCAP, many G20 countries, including India, is a part of it. It has been a catalytic funding. RIMES is a product of Tsunami Fund. Then we have US, which led Pacific Disaster Center. They are the one which brought innovative technology, the machine learning, into the disaster, particularly what we call a product disaster aware, a state of the technology part of it. Then African risk capacity, you heard there. This is a association which brought parametric insurance in a really big way. There are many examples which I would like to cite, tripartite. So G20 engagement could be catalytic and can make a difference. One of the key area of cooperation is the early warning has what is called the information supply chain, and that supply chain can be filled in from global to local action if there are collaboration among the G20 countries. My last slide is just in terms of 4 key takeaway messages, where a coordinated cooperation framework for deepened engagement of G20. In this report, we have cited many of such examples, what difference G20 engagement can bring. Similarly, from local to neighborhood levels, a cooperation mechanisms extending financing, and then how it can benefit LDC, states of Asia and Pacific. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sanjay, for that. And you've seen the QR code, and hard copies are here as well. It's a useful input to our work here. With that, I will say the Ambassador and SRSG, if they have any final thoughts before we wrap up.
Thank you very much. It has been a very rich discussion. And I was very struck, first of all, by the fact that early warning really works. It works. we saw the incredible slides at the beginning of Bangladesh in the early 70s, 1 million deaths, and now it's just a handful, it's less than 10. We also heard about this cyclone that struck in Tamil Nadu, less than 10 deaths. And 15 years before, with the tsunami, we had 6,400 deaths. So it really does work, and you know, it shows that we really have to work as quickly as possible to implement it throughout the world. And why does it work? Because we have the technology. And again, I was struck by the figure of 10 days. We now have forecasting capacity up to 10 days and becoming more and more precise, not just national, but regional, local. And so this incredible power now that we have can be really harnessed to improve everything. And that's why this initiative by the UN Secretary General is so opportune. We talked a lot about finance and how much would it cost, and there were all sorts of figures being hurled around. But I'll just concentrate on the 3.1 billion that was mentioned for the specific early warning for all system. As you were saying, it's not that much. 3.1 billion is less than 50 cents per inhabitant in the world. In fact, it's an incredible bargain. And not only is it not expensive, it's actually an investment, because as you were saying as well, the money we spend now, it will be many times paid for by the economies of scale that we will have averted by this early warning. So in this year, when we talk about loss and damage, as you know, COP28 will be the time when we will implement the fund on loss and damage, the funding arrangements. We have here something that is of incredible power to avert and minimize. We have avert, minimize, address. And the avert and minimize can help not have to address. So really we are here where we have the tools, we have the willingness to really work as quickly as we can to make a difference. And one final point, we're here in the G20 gathering. We like to remind everybody that G20 is about 80% of world GHG emissions, but it's also way over 80% of forecast capacities in meteorological capacities. So there's an incredible potential for the G20 to help those countries that do not have these capacities for data sharing and for helping all these SIDS and LDCs that do not have the capacity that their neighbor countries, G20 countries, have. So we really have to tap into that solidarity to make sure that we forge ahead.
So I'll be very brief. Thank you very much, Ambassador Cruz. So I'd like to thank everybody who has indeed been with us throughout this very marathon session. But it has been a marathon session because it's very important. It started from the community and went up to the global, and I think we have to go back to the community once again, because the stories that we heard from the people who have lived the disasters and now are seeing the improvement, but also being part of the improvement is really the key to early warning system. And one thing that I believe is the trust element. So we're living in a world where there's a deficit of trust. And whoever communicates about the warning, whoever educates the people about early warning needs the trust from the people. And I believe that trust is built very much strongly in the community. One other thing I would mention is that, and it was in the slide that was shown by ESCAP, that there's a community, there's a local, and then there's a global, but in between there's a regional and transboundary, which is a very important element in early warning, early action, because of course we know that risks do not respect borders. And there are already very, very effective regional mechanisms like the SEDIMA in the Caribbean, like the African sub-regional early warning systems that James was mentioning about, and to enhance these regional components is very important, in addition to making sure that the national components work. So there are many layers, but the important thing is that we need to connect all these layers and at the end make sure that the people in the communities are protected. So finally, I'd like to thank the speakers and the moderator. Thank you very much. And it has been a really enriching discussion, and I'm sure that we are now convinced that why this is one of the 5 priorities of this important working group. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. With that, we close this side event. We will take a break for about 20 minutes, have coffee, which is much needed. There is a plenary planned after that. I'm sure we can keep it shorter so that we can still finish on time. In the plenary, basically, we will revisit the deliverables that I presented in the morning, and if the working group wants to comment on that, in light of the discussion we've had this afternoon, how that needs to be tweaked, what is the advice, what are we committing to as the working group, and then we wrap up the day. We'll really try to finish it on time today so that you have some time to relax before the poolside dinner at the Leela Hotel. Thank you. So, coffee now.
Disasters, supercharged by long-term vulnerabilities such as climate change, unplanned urbanization, environmental degradation, etc., can kill and displace millions and impede delivery of social protection services for children, women, and other vulnerable groups, such as people on the move. Social protection systems has proven to be one of the most accessible and effective national capabilities to address survival needs of the disaster-impacted people and means to kickstart the socio-economic recovery, giving choice and means to vulnerable individuals and households to address their priorities. Countries should invest in building a risk-resilient and risk-responsive social protection system. Good idea? Let us join in the side event on shock-responsive social protection and reflect with at-risk communities, civil society, UN system, IFIs, and government in Mumbai during the second G20 DRR Working Group meeting.